There's a really dominant strain of humor that is directed toward people my age, which is basically just talking about how we're so old in our 30s, our bodies are falling apart and failing us every day, and life is basically over. And I know that it's meant to be a joke, but I actually think it's incredibly insidious and bad for mental health to consume stuff like this.
So wait, have you ever heard a saying that do what you have to do before you hit the age of 30? People are like trying to rush you to do a lot of things, like getting married, having kids before you reach the age of 30, because people believe that when you reach the age of 30, you are already old. Has someone ever told you something like that before? And that's what today's video is all about. Hey beautiful people, and welcome back again to my YouTube channel. So today's video, I'm going to play this first video that I played the part for you in the beginning. I'm going to play the video for you to the end so that we can be on the same page. Then I'll come back and talk about it.
So I'm 34 and I haven't been on TikTok very long, so I'm very much still in the process of like teaching the algorithm what to show to me. So I'm still getting a lot of like general 30-something content, and I really have to complain about it for a second. There's a really dominant strain of humor that is directed toward people my age, which is basically just talking about how we're so old in our 30s, our bodies are falling apart and failing us every day, and life is basically over. And I know that it's meant to be a joke, but I actually think it's incredibly insidious and bad for mental health to consume stuff like this, even as a joke. First and foremost, your body should not be falling apart in your 30s. Like, barring illness or injury, if sitting a little bit awkwardly while watching a movie for an hour or two causes you to be on bed rest for several days, like, see a doctor. That is not normal. Like, I'm actually way fitter in my 30s than I was in my 20s because I act taking care of my body. But like, stretch, babe, go for a walk, like do something about it. But second, and perhaps more importantly, like, your 30s are insanely young. Like, I'm 34 and I can't even believe how young that is. Like, I feel like I'm just starting to really know myself. Like, things are just starting to get good, and I'm so excited for the decades ahead of me. And part of that is I go out of my way to find women who are much older than myself, who are just living absolutely incredible lives, rediscovering themselves, reinventing themselves, and just living fully throughout the entire thing. But also, like, we very much will be old one day, and it won't be a joke. And like, the biggest disservice we can do to ourselves is pretending like this time when we're so young and vibrant and have everything in front of us is the time when we're old. We owe it to ourselves to appreciate and enjoy every stage of life for what it is, not preemptively complain about how old we are.
So now we're on the same page. What do you think? Do you think that your life ends at 30 or your life starts at 30? I have a lot to say concerning this topic because personally it's affecting me right now. But then I have a lot of stitches that I've gathered for you all to watch. Kindly watch, and I'm going to say my opinion at the end of the stitches.
Like, I'm 34 and I can't even believe how young that is. Like,
I think the way that we view aging and youth is very interesting and also very disconcerting. Like, the idea that your body starts to rapidly deteriorate because of age at the age of 30 makes not a lot of sense to me, because your body doesn't finish developing until your mid to late 20s. That's when your prefrontal cortex finishes developing, which is the part of your brain responsible for good decision making. So that would mean that you have 2 to 5 years between when your body finishes developing and when it begins to break down because of age, which does not make sense. And I think this concept comes from a couple of places. One, we have a huge misconception on how long people live without medical intervention, because we look at the average lifespan of people in history and we think, oh, nobody lived past the age of 50. So basically, if we live above 50, we're cheating God, because really that's old by human standards. But that's not accurate. Shorter average lifespans in the history, while there were some people that, yes, live longer because of medical advancement, like into old age, a lot of people live longer in the sense that they make it out of childhood or infancy, because there were so many deaths before the age of 18 that have now been avoided. So it's not that people who made it to adulthood always died at age 50. It's that people rarely made it to adulthood. And then when they did, they frequently lived out a approximately similar lifespan as we do today. And that's going to affect what you consider to be old. I also think that we have a patriarchal notion of, specifically with women, that values really young women, and preaching the idea that 30s is when your body begins to deteriorate helps support the notion that women who are out of their 20s are not healthy enough to bear children, but that is not medically sound in any kind of way. But mostly, I think we live in a capitalist hellscape, and the anti-aging industry is very powerful and very big and very profitable. It was valued at $60 billion last year, and it is projected to expand by twice as much to 120 billion in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's not unreasonable because it has boomed over the last 5 to 10 years. And it's done so with a couple of things. First of all, it's marked up anti-aging products more. It's also started marketing them to younger and younger people, telling people in their 20s and 30s that they're starting to get old and they need to do something about it. And it's shared the love with men, because while maintaining eternal youth has always been something that women are responsible, we now have greater expectations for men to do the same. And so now you have 20-year-olds injecting Botox, and both men and women in their 30s having these extreme skincare routines to avoid showing age, all because we are convinced that our 30s is when our body begins to break down.
So old in our 30s, our bodies are falling apart and failing us every day, and life is basically over.
Okay, as somebody who's at the end of their 30s, I have a lot to say about this. It won't be as good as the creator before. Go back and watch their video. It's fantastic what they have to say about the whole meme of people in their 30s acting like their grandparents or something like that. Okay, so I have some advice about that. Stop. And I'm gonna say stop because whenever I hear somebody on a podcast, they will say like, oh, I'm an old lady or I'm a grandpa, I'm so old. And then I'll undoubtedly find out that they're like 7 years younger than me. And the only thing I can say to them is grow up. Like, I mean that, grow up. It's very childish to call yourself old when you're not. And I know this because when I was 22, I turned 22 and I was like, I'm ancient. And I let that consume me for the entirety of my youth. It's a very childish thing to think that you're old because you haven't quite figured out what old really is. So please stop, go out, live, take on the day. All right, thank you.
So old in our 30s, our bodies are falling apart and failing us every day, and life is basically over.
Go watch that whole video. It's perfect. She's talking about how, like, the jokes that people make that being in your 30s means that you're, like, old and decrepit and, like, your life is over, you can't do anything meaningful anymore is completely harmful, and I completely agree. But I also wanted to add that I think these jokes and this mentality that life is over at 30 is exactly the reason why a lot of people, especially women, rush into long-term relationships in their early to mid-20s. From a very young age, women in this country are taught that if you're over 30 and still single, that is the worst fate that could ever befall you. Like, you're gonna be a loser, you're gonna be sitting in the house by yourself, all of your friends are gonna be married, you're gonna be completely alone. So you end up having this completely arbitrary deadline in your head that you have to be married and have your first child on the way by the age of 30, otherwise you've completely failed. It just becomes like a race to the finish line, when in reality, 30 is so young, and a lot of people aren't even ready to be married, let alone have a kid by the time they're that age. It's so young. A lot of women in their early to mid-20s feel like they have to settle for the first guy who's nice to them, or settle for the guy who's mean to them just because he's there, because they're like, oh, well, in 5 years I'm gonna be 30. I just don't have enough time anymore. Like, they're too scared to be single. That's why I hate these stupid jokes about your 30s being old, because I feel like it makes women feel pressured to stay in relationships that no longer serve them, because they feel like a deadline is approaching and they don't want to be single, otherwise they're not going to be married by the time they're 30. It's just completely made up. It's not real. I think if we change the narrative around our 30s to be more about like growth and prosperity and more security and deepening your relationships and just really reinforcing like how young you still are during that time, I honestly think a lot less women would be getting married in their mid-20s. I'm not in my 30s, so I don't know this firsthand, but whenever I post a video talking about how I think women are pressured to get married way too young, I always have women in their 30s commenting, being like, the average person in their 20s is not ready to get married. And I'm inclined to believe them, just like thinking about people that I know in real life. It just makes me really sad to see how many women feel pressured to get into a relationship or get married because they feel like if they're not married by the time they're 30, they're complete failures. It's just not true.
And I know that it's meant to be a joke, but I actually think it's incredibly insidious and bad for mental health to consume stuff like.
So go back and watch the whole video first. I want to talk about it for a second. Now, for one, I know that this is not the same for everybody. People have disabilities, people don't have access to healthcare, people have grueling physical jobs. But it's also true that your 30s are still very young, and that advertising in the United States especially has a vested interest in making you think that your life ends at 29. I've seen able-bodied people as young as 25 on this app talking about how old and broken they are when they've got pretty much everything going for them. And I want to direct this at my younger audience especially. Your 20s are not your peak in life. They don't even have to be your physical peak. I am more fit now at almost 40 than I was at 21. very fortunate and privileged few manage to get their shit together in their 20s and know who they want to be. But that's not everyone. It's not even most of us. People regularly discover new purpose and new dreams at 30, 40, 50, 60, and they succeed. Stop telling yourself that your life is over, because one day it will be, and you want to look back on a good one.
Your 30s are insanely young. Like, I'm 34 and I can't even believe how
I have seen so many people recently talk about how they're 22, 23 and they're terrified because they feel like they're old and they feel like they've no time left and they feel like they're failing in life. So when I saw that video from that creator, I was so glad to see it, because there needs to be more people on the internet talking about how amazing your 30s is. As women especially, and happy International Women's Day to all my girlies watching, as women, we're led to believe that once you're 30, you're done. And that could not be further away from the truth. I'm 28, I'm not even 29, 30 yet, and I feel so much happier and so much better than I did at 22 and 23. And I actually even feel younger. Like, I feel like I've so much more time left. I can do whatever I want. I don't have to subscribe to this idea or notion that once you're 30, it's all over as a woman, because it's not.
there's a really dominant strain of humor that is directed toward people my age, which is basically just talking.
This kind of humor is actually so sick. Like, I remember having a friend when I was younger who was like, oh my God, I'm so old now, because they were turning 22. Sometimes it feels like the only ages that we can be are a teenager when you can't do anything, or dead. I'm turning 30 this year, and for me, that is such a huge milestone. It's an accomplishment, and it was hard fought. And I just hate the idea that every year we're supposed to be lamenting the fact that we lived another year. And I always said from a young age that I would celebrate every year, and I wouldn't be sad about getting older, because getting older is a blessing and it's a gift. And like, I'm tired of feeling so young and being constantly given messages that I'm like, you know, 1 foot in the grave, decrepit, falling apart.
2 causes you to be on bed rest for several days. Like, see a doctor. That is not normal.
So you're a little annoyed with the tone of jokes on TikTok, and so you decided to just come out and tell everyone with chronic illness to just see a doctor. As if people can just go see a doctor. You know that. I know what your job is. You know people can't go to see the doctor. And even if you do have insurance, going to see the doctor about a chronic illness, I don't wish that on anyone. Like, I am so suspicious of any kind of like finance content creator, because there is always just this deep conservative, like, your problems are your issue, like, underneath all of it. And like, welcome to TikTok, wild video.
So I'm still getting a lot of like general 30-something content, and I really have to complain about it for a second.
I'm going to piggyback that and just generally complain about 30-somethings right now. Like, I get it, we're jaded. I'm an elder millennial, so I'm one of my only people in my friend group that's even on TikTok. And so it's like a daily social war battle, like trying to bring them into the future, but they want to be geriatric in their 30s so bad. And yesterday's TikTok hearing completely confirmed that. Do you know how many of these old biddies were in my DMs on Instagram, because I was posting some of the content from here on my story just to update them, and they were like, come back to IG. Girl, it stinks over there, okay? It's wrought with disease and corruption and false masks, falsehoods. Like, you don't even know what's real. You can't even smell the real air anymore, because you're just so like, you dial up, bitches.
Dominant strain of humor that is directed toward people my age, which is basically just talking about.
Hi, I'd like to enter the conversation. This creator is talking about how we're in our 30s and we're millennials and we're so old, and like, my idea of a fun night is to just stay in, and I used to do this, and like, it's not funny. I can't hear the word adulting ever again. I am finally in a place where I feel like I'm starting to learn about who I am and what I want in this life. And I feel good finally about my body, and, you know, grateful for what it can and will do for me. I am excited about the fact that, barring my recent layoff, I had the means to finally go do things that I wasn't able to do in childhood because of financial limitations from my family at no fault of theirs. And it's just not funny either. I enjoy the nostalgia and the things that I like. I also open my mind and I enjoy new things, even if my content is focused on nostalgia. And I'm really tired of this humor. It's not funny anymore. Let's move on. Let's be smarter about humor in our 30s. And let's complain less about what our bodies are or aren't doing for us, which is probably a little ableist if we really get into it. And talk more about how funny it is that we have this mentality because of the soul-crushing nature of capitalism and how it quite literally destroys our bodies. And no one taught us how to do taxes or understand a 401k or pick between a PPO and an HSA, and how none of this is actually our fault, and we should still be mad at boomers. Yeah, I think that's my official stance on that.
Actually way fitter in my 30s than I was in my 20s because I actually give a shit about taking care of my body.
Yes, like seriously, I'm so sick of hearing people blame their aches and pains and weight gain on just getting old and being in my 30s. If you are avoiding the cues that your body is giving you and blaming it on that, you are avoiding addressing the root of the problem. Your metabolism does not decline until after your 60s. And back pain doesn't just magically happen in your 30s unless you are someone who is not moving enough and not conditioning your body properly. I get it, we have more responsibilities as we get older, but one of those responsibilities is taking care of our body so that we can show up for all of these bigger responsibilities that we have in our life now. And I think a big part of the problem is diet culture and the conditioning that we were taught in our teens and our 20s about what health and fitness is supposed to look like. We were taught that health and fitness is all about being as skinny as possible and burning as many calories as possible in our workouts and cutting out carbs and going on these extreme diets and doing these HIIT cardio workouts where you're jumping all around the room without ever actually strengthening the muscles around the joints to protect them and, you know, get strong. Pair that with a more sedentary lifestyle, and yes, you will feel older in your 30s if you don't actually learn how to start taking care of your body properly. So I'm going to give you a little checklist. Are you walking or moving every single day? Are you drinking enough water? Are you getting enough protein and veggies and fiber? Are you strength training, even if it's just 2 to 3 times a week? And focusing on learning how to properly move your body and mobilize your joints and actually get strong and build muscle tissue, because those are the things that you should be focusing on if you don't want to feel old in your 30s.
All right, in this channel we have conversations than comment section, so feel free to share your opinion in comment section and kindly make your opinion respectfully. So now, when it comes to you being at the age of 30, I've always heard the saying that, oh, you have to get married when you're 25, when you're in your 20s, that's when you even make your money. It's like adulthood starts when you're 18, and you just have to rush as a woman. You get married at the age of 25, you have all your children before 30, so that when you're 30, that is when you start living your life, or you start getting free to do whatever you want to do because you're already old and your body is fading. Your body start failing you when you're at the age of 30. I hear all those kind of things, and that is how I grew up to like fear the age of 30. And I'm like, oh god, 30. Yeah, when you're getting to like 30, or when you're in your 30 years, you're like, oh my god, I'm getting old. I'm probably, when all those things they're saying that, oh, you have to get married, you have to have given birth, you must have been rich, you must have made it in life, you know, before you're at the age of 30. So when you get to that 30 years old and none of it has happened, you feel like a failure. You feel like, oh, you're already old and you can't even get to do things anymore. But all of this is just wrong, because when you sit down and think about it, most people tend to even know who they are when they are already on their 30s. When you're 20s, you don't even know who you are. You don't even know what you want to do in your life. You don't even know where your bearing is going to. It's when you're getting to the age of 30, you're already like, okay, this is what I want. This is who I want to be with. This is how I want my life to be. I feel like people should even start getting married at the age of 30, because by then you are not manipulated by anybody telling you what to do or not. And when it comes to childbirth, it's from age 35, they say that, doctors say that it's now getting very difficult. But some, I don't know. And when it comes to the illness, she talks about that when you're feeling ill, feeling sick and all of that, go see a doctor. While someone puts it in one of the stage, and she was like, oh, you think it's easy to go to the doctor fee are very expensive, we can't afford it and all of that. You don't just say it's like you go to the doctor, like it's just like, I feel like that's not what she meant when she says, she's like, if you're thinking that you're already feeling that old age, something that's old age sickness, something that people feel when they're like 50 something, 60 something years old, and you're feeling that age of 30, it is not because you're 30, it's because you're actually sick. Go see the doctor. I feel like that's what she's trying to say, not in a way like go see the doctor, because if that makes sense. Seriously. But when it comes, I feel like people should just calm down on this age thing when it comes to being 30. Stop pressuring, especially we women. I don't know how is it for men, but I can speak for a woman because I am one. I don't know how it is for men. So people stop pressuring women that, oh, you're going to be 30. I have friends that are not even married at the age of 30, and they're already like, oh, I want to get married, oh, I'm a failure, and all of them. Like, you're not. You are not. You're 30 doesn't mean that your life is over. In short, your life just started. In fact, you're just starting. You know, I just feel like society needs to talk more about this, because when you're at the age of 30, or when you're approaching 30, when you're in your 30s, that doesn't mean that your life has stopped. In fact, you have a lot to achieve at that 30 years old. I feel like people need to talk more about it. What do you all think? I'd like to know your opinion down in the comment section. Let me know what you think down in the comment section. Thank you all so much for sticking around to this point. I hope you enjoyed this one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this video if you find it helpful. And of course, you all, I'll see you in my next video. Bye.